If the guy's actually just press back, no, that's...
Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out. We hope to provide a good, informative program today. We really just want to talk a little bit about sort of understanding. I'm up here to just briefly talk a little bit about the first thing I said in those emails that we sent out were, how does this infringe upon and infringe First Amendment? And so I'm just going to draw that out a little bit. What we have is we have a government for the people, of the people, and by the people, that shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Now, what happens when those people, the people of the government, turn against a certain religious group? 9 years ago, early 2002, a public poll was conducted. It was on, favorability of views of Muslims. At the time, 39% of Americans held unfavorable views of Muslims. It's about 4 out of 10 people. That same poll was conducted 10 years later. The number went up 10%. We're now seeing about 49% of Americans have unfavorable views of Muslims. In the last 3 years, 37 mosques and Islamic centers have been proposed and have been opposed by communities. Most famously, we all know Park 51 in Lower Manhattan, where citizens actually asked the city of New York to deny a permit. It sounds like government establishing religion there. 20 states, lawmakers in 20 states, have proposed some sort of legislation to outlaw Sharia or Islamic law, which has no bearing on the American legal system at all. This is really dangerous territory we're wading into, where we talk about, it's free speech. I can say and have beliefs where I can, and that is absolutely true. But we have to look at the other side. How does this speech impact our tolerance and understanding of one religion? And if we can devalue and debase and demonize one religion, can't we do that for all religions? It's an all or nothing game, and that's really what we should be looking at. Next up, we have Razi Hashmi from the Public Policy School, who's going to talk a little bit, introduce our speakers, and read a little letter we got.
Good afternoon. Before I introduce tonight's speakers, or this afternoon's speakers, I actually want to share a letter from a rabbi here in Alexandria. He's one of the partners with the Islamic Society of North America's Shoulder to Shoulder campaign, which seeks to bring healing and understanding and also combating Islamophobia. It reads, I hope you will forgive this impersonal way of conveying my sentiments to you at this gathering. The late hour at which it was arranged and my own preparations for Yom Kippur, the holiest day on the Jewish calendar, make it impossible for me to attend in person. I thank you for being willing to hear a few words from me. This great country in which we live, and in whose future we are all invested, offers all sorts of protections to citizens, and even those who are not citizens. Among those protections is freedom of speech. Among those, too many Americans take a very narrow view of a right they consider an entitlement. They will say anything short of shouting fire in a crowded theater simply because they can, not because it contains truth or any positive value. Rights are useless without responsibility, and this is why I commend you for gathering today to offer an alternative to the presence of a speaker who has spoken irresponsibly so widely and so often. It is ironic that Nonie Darwish is being hosted by the Jewish Law Students Group virtually on the eve of Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is very much the symbol of the personal jihad each Muslim undertakes to purify his or her submission to the compassionate teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. With intensity and self-denial, Jews appear collectively before God in hopes of being forgiven for their sins. But before the prayers begin, an ancient formula is recited, Kol Nidre, declaring that any vows or oaths we take in the coming year are preemptively nullified only in the event that circumstances prevent us from fulfilling them. the Declaration protects our best efforts to do the very best we can. I cannot tell you how many antagonists, people with hatred in their hearts, suspicions in their souls, and malice on their minds have taken this declaration out of the context of worship and used it as evidence that Jews are dishonest, that Jews cannot be trusted, that Jews are out to swindle the world. Unfortunately, the words that are there can be used to support hatred and suspicion and malice. And unfortunately, by the time anyone thinks to ask the Jewish community what those words means in context, the damage is done. And now Jewish students of law who will stand piously in their synagogues in just a matter of days to recite that formula are willing to offer a form to someone who has demonstrably behaved the same way towards others. I'm stunned and saddened. My friends, we all know that there is plenty of work to do in our own communities to rebuff those among us who bring dishonor to our values and our sacred traditions. I like to think that we are partners in the endeavor, even if the efforts we make are in our own backyards. I want to assure you that at least this rabbi rejects the Islamophobia that diminishes the accused and the accuser alike. I want to assure you that I celebrate your efforts that parallel mine to raise the voice of tolerance and pluralism within your community and among the many peoples of our society. And I want to promise you that if I were on campus today, my place would be with you. Sincerely, Rabbi Jack Moline. Now, I'd like to introduce our two speakers. We have with us today Mr. Gadeir Abbas, who's a staff attorney with CAIR National, the Council on American-Islamic Relations, which is the nation's largest Muslim civil liberties and advocacy organizations. As a civil rights leader, he has spearheaded major lawsuits involving constitutional issues on particular concerns to the American Muslim community, including the ongoing landmark challenge to an Oklahoma ballot measure that would have barred reference to Islamic principles in the state's courts. He has also led a nationwide legal challenge to the so-called anti-Sharia bills introduced in more than 20 state legislatures. As a community activist, Abbas has helped to build interfaith coalitions in several states to defend civil and religious rights. He's also litigated on behalf of American Muslims targeted by warrantless use of GPS tracking devices and those placed on government no-fly lists without due process. He's also appeared in the media quite frequently, and I'm proud to call him and also the next speaker a colleague and friend. The second speaker is Tarin, who is the director of the Washington, D.C. office of MPAC, which is the Muslim Public Affairs Council. He pursued his undergrad at California State University of Northridge, and he's currently pursuing graduate work. He interfaces with government agencies and members of Congress on issues affecting American Muslim communities. And also, more recently, this is pretty fascinating, I recently received a phone call from President Obama thanking his organization, MPAC, for the work that they're doing in promoting a healthy discourse on civic identity. Now, without further ado, I'd like to bring up Gadeir Abbas.
So my name is Gadeir Abbas. I'm a staff attorney at the Council on American-Islamic Relations. And before I was an attorney, I was in law school. Before I was in law school, I was actually a teacher in Mississippi. So I'm going to share a story that so I'm going to share a story. So it was Indianola, Mississippi, right? Very, very small town, like such a small town that maybe a fifth of my students missed school the day the Super Walmart had its grand opening. So very, very small town. So when I came there, I was very curious as to how I'd be received as an American Muslim. And it very quickly became very apparent that I was the first Muslim that they had ever met in person, everyone. But really didn't have any problems, generally. And then one day, this isn't a problem, but one day, it was my planning period, so I was by myself, just, whatever, grading papers. And then one of my students walked in, okay? She walked in, she said, Mr. Abbas, I have a question. Mr. Abbas, Gadeir. What? No, and she got shy. She didn't want to ask me. And I said, no, ask me your question. I'm curious. And she said, Mr. Abbas, do you know Osama bin Laden? And she asked that question. It wasn't malevolent, right? So it's striking, but it wasn't malevolent. In her mind, there were two Muslims that she was aware of. One was Osama bin Laden, someone she sees on the news, international terrorist, enemy, sworn enemy of the United States. The other was Mr. Abbas, her English teacher. And she thought, because there's only two that I know of, maybe they happen to know each other. So this is like one category of some of the challenges that American Muslims face in America. There's only a few million of us, and there is a value in having a personal relationship with an American Muslim to personalize and humanize the adherence to a particular faith. And so my student in that case, there was a little, and she was 13 years old, and maybe she should have known better. But this was innocent ignorance, and that's something that's a challenge for the American Muslim community to address. And so there's that, and then there's this other thing. Okay, this other thing is not innocent, right? So there are people, and Nonie Darwish is a really great example of one of them. There are these people like Nonie Darwish whose objective in life, whose salary is derived from actually fomenting and channeling anti-Muslim sentiment into actions against the Muslim community. Okay, so let's talk about some of those actions. And one of them is something that I actually spent 2.5 hours dealing with today. So a cab driver in Washington, D.C. was taking someone from D.C. to National Harbor. And during that cab ride, there were two passengers. And they asked him, so he's a Pakistani American. They asked him, well, what religion are you? Are you one of those, and they used the term ragheads. And he said, I'm a Muslim. After he said that, they spent the next 20 minutes threatening to kill him. They took out a weapon. And this is a man with two children who's driving, and he's wondering if he's ever going to see his 2- and 7-year-old kid again, and he has a 20-minute drive to their hotel. So that's what he's thinking while he's making this drive. So they don't attack him in the car. He gets out, and then they attack him, right? So he ends up with a broken hand and a bruised up face. And that's part of the consequences of this cottage industry, which Nonie Darwish is a part of. It channels and it foments this latent anti-Muslim sentiment that unfortunately is very prevalent in society. And some of the consequences that we see are very personal. There are people that get beat up. You can go to Columbia, Tennessee, and you can stand in the ashes of a mosque that was burned to the ground. So, okay, that's like very specific instances, but there's like this, especially in the past few years, there's been a really kind of like a next iteration of this Islamophobia, and they take specific forms. So, have you guys ever heard of David Hashmi? Anybody, David Hashmi? Okay, so he's gotten a lot of attention lately. Okay, so let's just look at some of the things that he said. Okay, so wait, I can make this big, right?
Or F5.
Slideshow and then from the beginning. Okay. Hi, David. So, so let's just look at some of the things that he says. Okay, so Islam was born in violence and will die that way. Oh, that's not nice. Muslim youth should be taught from the cradle to reject the religion of their forebears. America should, quote, remind the Muslims of their subordinate status and the impotence of Allah. Okay, that's pretty outrageous things that he's saying. Now let's take a look really quickly. Okay, so this guy, in an ideal world, you're going to have people like this, and you know what? I would defend in a court of law his right to say these terrible, terrible things. He should be allowed to say these things. But we should live in an environment that actually can judge this person for what he is and not provide him a national platform to pursue his ends. So let's just look at the degree of influence he's had on the country in the past year. Okay. Has your state banned Sharia? Oh, this is so terrifying. So this guy, David Hashmi, he wrote legislation. He wrote a few different versions, and it got introduced in all of these places that are not right. Okay? All of these places. And we'll focus in specifically on Oklahoma and Tennessee very quickly. But so this guy who thinks the terrible things that he thought, and then we showed in the last slide, it has a profound influence on the discourse of our discussions on American Muslims, as well as what state legislatures are doing everywhere. Okay. Wow. Yeah. And don't think that these things are getting introduced and they're just being like pushed to the side. So in Oklahoma, 695,000 people voted for a constitutional amendment to their state constitution. And what that amendment did, it discriminated against Muslims and no one else. That's what that amendment did. In Missouri, 66% of lawmakers co-sponsored. So forget about voting. They were really willing to put their name up front and stand in favor of this bill. And then we've seen in Kansas, and this is an indicative example, of any time an anti-Muslim measure actually comes up to a vote, it's overwhelmingly approved. In the state house, it was 122-2. Okay, so Tennessee, and this is the next iteration. Okay, so let's just look at this quote. The knowing adherence to Sharia. Sharia is like the religious traditions of Islam. That's what Sharia is. The knowing adherence to Sharia is evidence of an act in support of the government of the overthrow of the United States government. Okay, so this isn't, unfortunately, this isn't David Yerushalmi just talking, right? This isn't him writing an article. This is a piece of legislation that was introduced by the head of the Republican Party in Tennessee in the General Assembly in Tennessee. That was what was introduced. That language, and it was a big long bill. Lots of other terrible things. This is indicative of the degree of terribleness that the rest of the legislation had. And so when we're talking about these like people like Nonie Darwish, this is where they would like. This is the trajectory of their discourse. They're not just what Nonie Darwish and David Yerushalmi and others are advocating is not necessarily just here's my opinion on Islam, take it or leave it. They have very particular, concrete legislative objectives, social objectives to marginalize Muslims, to relegate them to secondary status, and it's not a matter of speculation at this point. We can actually look beyond their statements, but the legislation that they've successfully introduced. Okay, so right, Sharia law. How many people have heard something in the media at some point in time, the past bit, about Sharia law? Sharia law is a part of American discourse. Presidential candidates take positions on Sharia law. This is astonishing. This is a really fascinating development. But what it comes down to is when we, so for instance, okay, I'll say that for a second. So in Oklahoma, they passed this amendment got passed. 70% of the vote, overwhelming, no chance that it was going to be defeated politically, right? People are voting for, unfortunately, for these anti-Muslim bills. So a couple days, 2 days after the election, we file a lawsuit, and we say, and we're not saying that Islam is here, and we want to, and we want to displace the Constitution. That's not what's happening. Instead, what we're doing is we're saying that this Constitution, of which we claim to be, of which we belong to, this Constitution protects our rights to be free from the government stigmatizing our faith, from relegating us to secondary status in the political community. That as American Muslims, we have the right to the free exercise of our religion. That we're pointing to the First Amendment. Filed, they approved it on Tuesday. We filed the lawsuit on Thursday, and on Monday of the following week, this is what the judge has to say. Right? This case addresses issues that go to the very foundation of our country, our Constitution, and particularly the Bill of Rights. Throughout the course of our country's history, the will of the majority has on occasion conflicted with the constitutional rights of individuals, an occurrence which our founders foresaw and provided for through the Bill of Rights. Basically, what her point was is that we've already made the choice, and the founders have already made the choice. By creating the Bill of Rights, what what our political system has done is they've set aside certain issues from the will of the majority. So it's not a matter of, we're not going to put your First Amendment rights up to a vote. That's settled. You have those rights, even if 99% of the people don't want you to have those rights. You have them, and that's it. Period. No exceptions. No rules. And so what we find ourselves, and I think it's a fortunate, it's an unfortunate situation, but one of its one of the things that I think are I think when we look back in a decade that are going to be positive about this situation is that right now American Muslims are defending the Constitution. We are saying that the Establishment Clause of the American Constitution forbids this bigotry. We're saying that the Free Exercise Clause provides us these rights. And so that's a great position to be in because we are American, whether people like Nonie Darwish want to admit it or not. American Muslims are American, right? American Muslims. American, that's the first word. That means we're American, right? So it's and so what's important now is that we need to understand that these actions don't come out of thin air. There's a context in which these actions arise, and Nonie Darwish is providing the fuel for this context. And I think this is a great segue to Horace, who's going to talk more broadly about these things. So thanks, guys.
Thank you, Gadeir, and thank you all for coming out this afternoon. Although I thoroughly enjoy your company, I would rather not be here. I'd rather be picking up my daughter. She's going to be off of school, actually just off of school now. I would rather be picking her up and taking her home and doing homework with her. But unfortunately, we're here. And it brings us together to have a conversation that I think is needed to have in our country. I think the conversation that we're having today is important. It's important for where our country is headed. It's important for our national discourse. And it's important because we as Americans have valued the very principles that Gadeir spoke about towards the end, that the framers put together. We've cherished these principles. We've died for these principles. Americans have given countless number of lives and shed blood to ensure that these principles of freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and just everything else that we hold so dear to as a nation are preserved. And so, although we might not want to be here, I think it's important that we're here. And the second thing I'd like to say before I actually get started is that this is not about Mrs. Nonie Darwish. This is really not about her. She has the right, and as Gadeir mentioned, I think everybody should know this and understand this clearly. She has the right to express her opinions, her thoughts, and the whole industry that Gadeir was talking about. That industry has the right to be a proponent of any thought in our society. They can say that Islam is not a religion that I want to follow, that Islam is an evil religion, and that's fine. If you say that, you have a First Amendment right to say that, and you shall be protected, and that is part of your right as an American citizen. But I think what we're saying today is that we want to talk about the soul of our nation, where our nation is going, and which direction this country moves forward. This country has gone through a traumatic experience. 10 years ago, our country went through a traumatic experience. It affected every single one of us. I also was a teacher, and the week of September 11th was my first week in a classroom with a group of middle schoolers. And it wasn't just any school. It was a Muslim American school in Los Angeles, California. And I came into class, and I saw these kids grappling with what had happened. They had gone through a traumatic experience because their homeland was attacked, their country was attacked. And they were not feeling safe. We had to close the school down. But it wasn't just that they were feeling attacked. There was another lingering feeling that they had, these kids had, and I saw this very well. Their identity was being questioned for the first time. Their Americanness was being questioned for the first time. The fact that they had been born here, had been raised there, and that they had never been questioned about being American, that was now starting to be questioned. And I saw these young kids, I say until now, I stay in touch with, and a lot of them are in college, that reveals my age, but a lot of them are in college, and I've seen this generation deal with that, with what it means to be attacked by a group of foreign terrorists, and then at the same time, your faith being attacked and questioned. So what we're gathered here today is not about one individual. It's really about how we choose to move forward as a nation. And the fact that we're having these conversations about Sharia law, the fact that there's over 25 states who are considering legislation, the fact that, a Muslim American in Florida does not have the ability to participate directly and be engaged in the party of Lincoln and Reagan, these are very, very troubling questions. And this is happening. There's Muslims around the country who are being questioned in terms of their identity and in terms of their loyalty. And this is not new to America. This is not new to America. President Kennedy went through this. I mean, when President Kennedy ran his campaign, the question of his loyalty was right in the middle of the conversation in that campaign. I mean, there were people who were coming out, and if you read, I can suggest you a couple books. If you read the material that came out around that campaign, where President Kennedy, as the first Catholic president, was being questioned whether his loyalty, again, was to the Pope, was to the Vatican, or was it to the Constitution? And that's exactly what you see here. The loyalty of Muslim Americans are again being questioned. Are you loyal to the Sharia, not knowing what in the world the Sharia is? Right? It's a mysterious word. It's something that conjures up images of women being lashed, of stoning, of beheading, things that are foreign to every single one of us. Every single one of us. But are you loyal to Sharia? Or are you loyal to the Constitution? And that's a very simple question. And the majority of Americans, I mean, my godfather is a Jewish American man in his 80s. And he calls me almost once a week. And he has a question, because there's folks who go to his Rotary Club and say that Muslim Americans are trying to derail the Constitution because they're trying to implement Sharia. And so I have this conversation with this man, and every week I get a different call, because there's people like Mr. Darwish who have the right to, who go out and who have networks built across this country, who are trying to create a fifth column from the Muslim American community. And there's a lot of reasons why this is happening. There's financial reasons, there's ideological reasons, there's political reasons. We know that, we understand that, and that's fine. But we are gathered here because we need to be able to push back on that. And from my perspective, there's two visions of America. Really, there are. There's two visions of America. There's an exclusive vision of America that's held by people like Mr. Darwish and the others who have created this cottage industry. And I hate using these terms like cottage industry. I mean, it's just a few folks who developed the market, and as the Center for American Progress put out in terms of a few weeks ago on their report, just over the past 10 years, foundations have given these individuals and institutions over $42 million to write books, to write reports, to speak, and to engage in these conversations. So it's become an industry. It's become a profit-driven industry. And so there are two visions of America. An America that's exclusive, where these individuals see America being a place where pluralism is not part of the American fabric, where they're threatened by pluralism, where they don't want to recognize the contributions of a community like the Muslim community, whose citizens, 1 out of 30 physicians in America is a Muslim. Thousands of men and women in uniform, both domestically and internationally armed, are fighting for us. Thousands of law enforcement agents on the ground. Elected politicians, civil servants, American Muslims are a part of the American fabric. There's Muslim Americans who have given their lives from the Revolutionary War to the latest war that we're in both Iraq and Afghanistan. This is the contribution of this community. Yet there's an exclusive vision of America that doesn't want to recognize that wants to see the contributions of this community or the existence of this community as a fifth column and as foreign. That's a vision that's there. As we said, this is not a new vision. It's happened before. It's happened to various communities. It's happened to Jewish Americans. It's happened to African Americans. It's happened to Japanese Americans. It's almost part of the hazing process of becoming part of this nation. It is, but it is Americans who come together and who are able to build coalitions and who are able to stand up against this. And this language is the same language that Catholics went through. It's the same language that the Jews went through. If you read some of the same language, it's what was prohibiting synagogues from being built in New York City. Really. It's some of that same language. So it's that exclusive vision of America that individuals like Mr. Darwish has. And our organization just put out a report about 35 of these individuals. And we profiled 35 individuals who continue to do this. And what's interesting is a lot of them, and this might not be the case for Mr. Darwish, but 33 out of 35 of these individuals have some problematic and hateful remarks that they've made about other religious and ethnic communities as well. And so it's not only the Muslim American community, it's an exclusivist vision of America. They don't want to see an America that's diverse, that's pluralistic, that's what we all want in terms of, and it's where this country is heading. So and President Clinton, he outlines that directly. President Clinton says the biggest challenge to this country is how we're going to deal with pluralism in the coming 25 years. If we cannot deal with the pluralism and the diversity of this nation, we're not going to be the same America that we've been for the past 2 centuries. So it's a vision of America that's exclusive. The second vision of America is a vision of America that's inclusive. And that's where we come in. And when we say, Mr. Darwish and everyone else in that camp has the right to say what they want, but this other vision of America that's inclusive has the responsibility. She has the right, but we have the responsibility to stand up together. And this vision of America is a vision where we're willing to recognize the contributions of every single member of this society. Where in our seal, in the great seal of this country, when it says, E pluribus unum, from many we become one, that is a foundational understanding of everything that we do. Because yes, from many we do become one. That inclusive vision of America is a vision where we believe that it's the diversity, it's the various skills and various backgrounds of its citizens is that which makes America stronger and safer. That's the inclusive, and I think those two visions of America are being tugged at. Really, if you look at the national discourse, those two visions of America are being tugged at and spoken about. And I think what we have to do is be able to clearly articulate that inclusive vision together. We have the responsibility to do that. So that's the inclusive vision of America. And to be very honest, President Bush, right after 9/11, he did something that was absolutely brilliant. 3 days after 9/11, he went into a mosque in Washington, D.C., the Islamic Center of Washington, D.C. He stood in a mosque, and he quoted from the Quran, and what he said was absolutely brilliant. And that's why the national discourse around Islam and Muslims was completely different right after 9/11. When President Bush got up there, he said the Muslim American community is part and parcel of the society. They are part and parcel of this country. And anyone who threatens that community threatens America. That was a message that President Bush sent. It was a strong message. And if you look at the polling around 9/11, you'll see that the conversation and the image of the Muslim American community was at one of its highest points. And this was right after the traumatic experience that we had gone through. But things have changed over the past 10 years. It's changed. That tone has changed. That conversation has changed. And the reason for, one of the reasons, and that's not the only reason, one of the reasons is this industry that has developed, that is building a narrative that Muslim Americans are a fifth column and must not be trusted. And that's key. Must not be trusted as being a contributing member of this society. Because you never know. Your neighbor, you never know. If she looks a certain way or he looks a certain way, you never know and you can't really trust them. And that's what they kind of push at and they tug at, and that's the conversation they try to bring up. So having said that, the next question is, because a lot of these conversations that come from this industry, at the core isn't the idea or the issue of national security. Are there legitimate national security questions that need to be asked? Of course there are. Is our country a place where there are national security threats from a specific violent extremist ideology? Yes, it is. But how we address that threat is key. Whether we do that together as Americans, or whether we completely marginalize a group of people who are inherently fighting that fight, are on the front lines of that fight. That's the key. What the vision of individuals like Mr. Darwish is that you completely marginalize that community, and you approach this threat through a lens of military, of force, of mass force. And the other vision is that, no, we recognize our threat, but we're able to address our threat in an intelligent and sophisticated manner, the way we have been able to with various other threats. So this idea that that Muslim Americans or whoever does not acknowledge the threat of Sharia is somehow downplaying the national security threat to this country is ridiculous. Everybody understands it. Muslim American institutions understand this the most. We are the ones who are dealing with issues of national security. And it is our mosques, it is our community leaders who are dealing with this issue on a daily basis and ensuring that our communities, that our young people are civically engaged, are positive, and are engaging in American pluralism. And so, what Mrs. Darwish and this kind of cohort of individuals say is that the Muslim American community is a suspect community. They cannot be trusted, and they should not be part of the American mosaic and pluralism. And what we say is no. Any threat that we have, our values and principles as Americans, is bigger. And we will be able to address that threat if we're able to come together as a society, as a country, and live up to the words on the seal of this nation that says, E pluribus unum, from many we become one. Thank you.
I'm sure a few of you want to try and head downstairs, so we're going to allow anyone who wants to sneak out now. If you do have time and want to hang around, we're going to do maybe a little Q&A. On your way out, please feel free to grab some of our materials in the back. There's a report from CAIR and Tarin if you care for one.